well, my notifications are off, but Patrick never seems to get that one quite right. So
Are you kidding me right now? JG, like you're already pissing me off. So
I
just
know that, we just spent about 10 days together. So, when siblings spend too much time together, it's like we need some space. I kind of feel like we're like that right now.
yeah, it's right.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Rein It In, episode number 27. And today I got 5 sticky notes, including a very special one called predictions. That's going to be the last one. We're going to cover BC housing initiatives that are going on. We're going to cover why we don't expect the bubble to burst. We're going to cover the real impact of rising interest rates. And we're going to cover the Toronto condo market specifically. It's going to be a good episode, Patrick. And I know you and I are already kind of fired up.
It's not going to be good. It's going to actually be great. I'm going to even call it amazing. So listen in. Let's get to work. Hey, folks, thanks for watching. Just a reminder to like, subscribe, hit that bell for notification. But here's what I really want you to do. JG and I don't always agree on stuff, but I think I'm always right, and JG's just about always wrong. What's your feedback? Let us know in the comments. Who's more right, me or JG? Let me know.
All right, Patrick, our first sticky note is the BC Premier, Dave Eby, is actually pushing really hard to solve some of this housing shortage. And I like some of the things I'm seeing. Now, I know you're critical about all things government, so I can't wait to hear your opinion on this. But let's go through some of the things that Dave is doing, because I think that what's happening is all these provinces are going about solving the housing shortage their own way, although they're using a lot of the same tactics. I'm kind of curious to see your thoughts on this.
Well, I think, what's interesting about Dave and Dave Eby is that, he's one of the only premiers that is being very aggressive. He's just pushing things through. Now, a shout out and, actually credit where credit is due. And Dave is being very aggressive in how he wants to handle the housing shortage in terms of supply. And I think that's great. And the other side of that, of course, the more pessimistic side of me is it's not going to really make a big difference. But we have to start somewhere. He is starting somewhere. He's pushing stuff through without any real regard for what the mayors are thinking in these municipalities. He's going, quite frankly, I don't care. We have a housing shortage. We're going to push this stuff through.
You know what? And frankly, this is where it has to start, Patrick. One thing we know about municipalities is most of them are not going to take this kind of proactive stance on much. It's very rare for these municipalities to take proactive, approaches to these housing issues. We have seen it happen in Alberta, though. I do got to say, the Edmonton, the municipality of Edmonton did some things, which is great. But this all started in Ontario last year, and now BC is following along. You and I talked about it. We knew that all the provinces would follow suit. Really, Ontario got it started. Let's kind of break down the different parts of this legislation. One of them, this new housing legislation. One of these big changes, Patrick, people are pushing for is the zoning bylaws, and really pushing municipalities to update their zoning bylaws so that it's easier to get development through, and we can put more density within the allowable kind of residential zoning. So like even in Ontario, and it's the same in BC, even a single plot of land where previously you can only do a single family, now you can do 4, 5, 6 units on that single parcel of land. That'll make a huge difference, Patrick. I know you're a little pessimistic on all things government, but this is one of my favorite parts of the initiatives they're pushing across. I think this makes a real impact.
Well, I think, like I say, Dave has made some big decisions, and I think that's going to be supportive. Forget about the long term. I think it'll have an impact long term. It doesn't really fix a short term problem that was created all along by not having policies that open these things up. But he's basically eliminated single family zoning right across the province. So in other words, he went into territories, into municipalities where, the mayors are going, no, we don't want that because it's going to get things out of control, or things are going to go out of control. But having said all of that, that's a view, that's an opinion. Now, here's the thing about it. As investors, when we're looking at how we invest and what we invest in, it changes the game a little bit from a couple of different perspectives, not the least of which is if you are that individual who has the, resources, or even has the competency or ability to do development, this really opens up a door of opportunity. If you're that individual who can raise capital and bring money to the table, all of a sudden you're looking at a plot of land and you're going, holy cow, this could be a sixplex, or this could be a fourplex based on that land. And all of a sudden, it changes the game for how you can develop it and have that investment opportunity. The other side of that, by the way, JG, which is really controversial, is he's not wrapping a bunch of the parking restrictions in some areas. Like, he's not making it about parking. So on top of the fact that we're taking single family, putting a fourplex, a sixplex, there's nothing around parking. So in other words, forget about parking. It doesn't matter. We just want places for people to live. They can walk, I guess.
You daft prick.
No. It's actually quite sensible.
Well, listen, here's the thing. Parking is I got several thoughts on this. I deal with this stuff, and I was going to say crap because it is, but I'll say stuff because I'm going to be gentle. But I deal with this stuff on literally a daily basis at Vistor Property Group. One of the things that happens here is parking is the number one issue that prevents development. The single one. It's the thing that we always run into. And if you eliminate those parking restrictions, and even if you loosen them off a little bit, it'll push development through in a huge way. It'll really speed things up, because one parking issue, Patrick, here where I develop, which is in Ontario, one parking issue can back up a development 18, 24, 36 months just because you don't have, maybe you need say the old, and by the way, these parking requirements are very, very, very antiquated. And some of these downtown lots, or when you're in a high density area, there's no way you're going to be able to meet some of these old parking requirements. So we are desperate for this to be updated. There's no doubt about it. I think that's a huge plus, and I think this is a huge positive. But I really think, and this is, I think every investor watching this should comment below on this video and congratulate not only Ontario, but also BC and everyone else who's pushing this legislation through. And the reason for that is, if you're an existing investor, every single one of your properties has just went up in value because your land is now more valuable. If you have a single family home that you have either a 1 unit or a 2 unit on, because back in the day we used to be able to do 2 units on an R1 lot, you can now do 3 units, 4 units, up to 6 units, depending on where you are in the country and what zoning bylaws are in place. The point is immediately your land has just went up in value and you just became wealthier because of that. This is a really, really good move, and people have got to back this.
I agree 100%. And again, for investment opportunities, some of the concern is that, developers are going to swoop down and buy these lots and then sit on them, or not even developers, but investors, and sit on them and wait for the prices to go up. That will actually drive prices. So that argument aside, let's go back to some fundamentals. With Dave Eby and what the decision he made, when we look at, and I'll just talk about right now about the Fraser Valley, Lower Mainland, Vancouver, is the necessity for densification. It's just the reality of what we need. Will it bring house prices down? No, I don't think so. I don't see that in the future, certainly not in the near term. And even when we look into the long term, the reality is that more and more people are coming to the province of British Columbia. Now, as much as the economic conditions of BC may be softening right now, which is kind of happening across the country, short of perhaps Alberta, the point is this: we've got ALR, the Agricultural Land Reserve, we've got the US border, we've got the ocean, we've got the mountains, we've got this narrow footprint of people coming in, and we don't have the supply that we need to accommodate. Densification has to happen whether we like it or not. You can compare it, I guess, to maybe Manhattan, where you got this little small area and 10 million people live in it. Well, we think that can't happen here. And the reality of it is it can. British Columbia is a very coveted province in terms of its beauty, in terms of its weather, and even economics. When we look at the Fraser Valley, it's one of the agricultural epicenters of the whole country. On top of that, Vancouver is the landing ground for technology and those individuals who are driving technology. So at the end of the day, the immigration or the interprovincial migration into this province isn't going to stop anytime soon. And this densification is absolutely necessary. So when we look into the future and we think about this from an investment point of view, JG, I think there's huge opportunities for those who can either have capital, place capital, raise capital, and or just have skills to develop, because it's going to open up big doors of opportunity.
Now we're I feel a little uncomfortable right now, Patrick, because you and I are agreeing a little too much for my liking. I much prefer to disagree with you than agree with you too much. So we'll get to disagreeing in a minute. But I do want to mention one last thing that I like that the provinces are pushing into their legislation, and that is within the right centers, within the right zones, like, for example, the various transportation areas, like, for example, Metro Vancouver area, like where the metro is or where the light rail stations are, whatever the case may be. They're actually forcing minimum density.
Yes.
And they're saying, listen, if you're going to build here, you can't build 1 or 2 stories. You have to build 12 stories or 20 stories. I think this is really smart. This is pushing developers to go to go high enough in order to make a real meaningful impact. But what it does better than that, Patrick, and this is what people who don't do development, fail to understand, is when the provinces does something like this in their legislation, this supersedes the local municipal bylaws. And it's these local municipal bylaws that stand in our way as developers, but these provincial laws supersede them. And what happens thereafter, and by the way, just so everybody knows, we're in this mode right now across the country where all the municipalities have now got to catch up to the province's laws. And this is an uncomfortable period. I got to tell you, here in Peterborough, we're horrible for this. Peterborough is really slow at getting on board naturally. Most municipalities are, but they don't have a choice now. They have to comply with the provincial laws. And as a result, there's this period of time which we're in right now, and it may take another year, it may take another 5 years, but we're moving in the right direction finally. And even though it might be, uncomfortable and challenging for the next couple of years, the developers who fight their way through that red tape will clear the way for everybody else, and also will make a meaningful impact. I mean, the first ones, that first mover advantage will get rewarded in most cases.
I'm going to add the thing I want to point out here is that, listen, it's the government that caused this problem to begin with. And so as much as, Dave Eby has made some good decisions, I believe, these are still, we'll call them in proposal stages. In other words, yes, he's driving it through, and yes, there's not supposed to be anything in the way. But listen, leave it to the government to get in their own way. And what happens with municipalities is they'll tie it up in bureaucracy if they don't agree with it. So the reason I share that is, from an investor point of view, it's like they make announcements for, let's say, a new ring road or a new transportation change in a highway or LRT. It's proposal, and are politicians known to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth all of the time? And, the answer to that question is absolutely not. So when we see these developments, we often say to investors, make sure that you're seeing like caterpillars and graders and people that aren't leaning on shovels before you start investing into that future state that they're talking about. And I think we have to be a little bit cautionary as investors is, okay, cool, this is really sounding good. Let's make sure it's real. Let's just make sure we back test these proposals and that this is in fact going to happen before we start placing our capital and making big commitments and writing offers and getting conditions removed. So we just got to be a little bit cautious about it. And I just want to kind of put that, because it is government after all, and politicians are known to maybe, stretch the truth a little.
I lie. I'm actually in this position because of how effectively I lie to you.
The best thing to do, Patrick, is for people to call their local municipality and see where they are at with complying to these various laws. Like you said, Patrick, I think the one in BC is only proposed right now, but the one in Ontario, the bill, I forget the bill number, but it has had royal assent now for 1 year. It passed November 28th last year. So it's happening. It's done. And the municipalities have no choice to comply now. But yeah, you got to check with your municipality. I think that's smart advice, Patrick. Okay. That'll be that.
That was a good segment. I liked it.
That was a good segment. We agreed a little too much. It was a little too hunky-dory for my liking. All right, Patrick, the next topic we want to tackle is why we don't expect the bubble to burst. And, people love to refer to the real estate market as a bubble all the time. I mean, I think over the last 15 years I've been or just under 15 years I've been investing in real estate, I've constantly heard this word bubble. I've never seen any bubble pop yet, Patrick. And who knows, maybe now, the question is now the time the bubble's going to pop? Because that's what some people are expecting. So we got some fantastic graphs we want to show and some really great visuals to talk about this bubble and whether or not it's going to burst.
It's interesting. In my YouTube feed, I have a couple of guys that show up that are really well followed, and I force myself to listen to them. And it is just absolutely unbelievable, the negativity and how housing is going to crash and nobody can see it, but they can see it. And don't they know that these prices and affordability, and they're really have no argument for why they think this whole market's going to crash. Of course, they don't talk about when that time frame might be or what they're calling a crash and what might it be. I mean, it really is ridiculous in terms of the exuberance they put behind the Canadian market is going to crash. And it's like, settle down, you guys. Let's just look at what's really happening. So I can see the sense that, does this make sense? Do these economic conditions make any sense? It's like interest rates are high, listings are down, listings are up, sales are down. At some point, you think the real estate market has got to come off. And actually, I agree that it probably will come off, but it's not going to be this bubble that bursts. It may have some air deflated from it, especially when you look at the highs of 21 and 22. Those were the boom parts of the real estate cycle, JG. You and I've talked about it so many times. And will they come down? Yes. And this is where smart or savvy investors who are paying attention, who aren't buying into the hype, buying into the headlines, or just looking at the economic fundamentals, start to see that this is, in fact, opening some doors of opportunity. So in this particular case, we're talking about population growth. The government, now, I was about to say the government is committed to continuing with the immigration, and they have to, because of course our net growth from a natural way of having children is way down. Like it's like ridiculously low. So we need immigration. The government continues.
But I got to say, Patrick, you and I have a couple friends that we know very well. And they each have 5, 6, 7 kids each. I mean, I'm thinking they're doing their part for sure. I mean, I'm not doing my part, but they're doing their part for sure.
You're not doing your part, but they're making up for your slowness or your lack of. But my point is this: is that should we trust the government if they're at some point get a lot of pressure put on them? Will they back off of immigration? Yeah, perhaps. But let's just put it this way. Even if they cut immigration in half, JG, we were over 1 million people came into this country looking and having to find accommodations to live, whether that be international students, temporary workers, or even permanent residents. So even if they cut all of that in half, it's still a ridiculous amount. I don't want to say ridiculous. It's still a lot of people coming into the country that need a place to live. So that that alone is going to help put a floor under real estate, and certainly in the rental demand component of it. And of course, as being a rental housing provider, what do we want to know? We want to know that we've got a lineup of clients that want to live in our properties. So it's all to say that when we look at why there isn't going to be a bubble, interest rates are an influencer. They're not going to be high forever. And I mean, we don't know, but let's say over the next couple of years, they're going to come down a little bit. Things are going to soften. Unemployment starting, we'll talk about that in a minute. Unemployment's starting to soften, but it's not coming off the rails. And when we look regionally, when we look at the regional numbers, some areas are going to be softer than others, but there's nothing that says this bubble's going to burst, like poof.
Now, let's talk about that, Pat. Let's unpack that because that I called one of those, by the way, I call that a Patrick pontification right there, which I love. I'm a big fan of them. But let's unpack it. First things first is you talked about people talk about a bubble, but people have to understand that their own benchmark plays a role in that bubble, right? And what I mean, and you talked about, if you could. The bubble is based on what benchmark? Where are you benchmarking to? Are you benchmarking to November of 2021 when stuff was completely artificially inflated because of all the cheap money that was flooding into the market? Is that the benchmark in your mind, or is the benchmark 2019, or is the benchmark 2015? What is the benchmark in your mind? Because that makes a big difference. And I think if you ask the average person that question that talks about a bubble, Patrick, you say, listen, what's your benchmark for that assessment you're making? You'll always get a very, very interesting answer that will have an unrealistic benchmark. And that's the beginning of people who make these comments about bubbles, is they have an unrealistic and an unfounded benchmark that they can't. And of course, that benchmark doesn't make sense. Therefore, the rest of it doesn't make sense in my mind.
Oh, 100%. And I think what, the majority of people, the masses, will look at and say, well, this is what the headlines say. So they're just reading the headlines and buying into the headline. I want to just say something is, we've done a couple of live meetings, and when we look from an investment point of view, and I don't know if it's the best time to kind of shine a light on this, but those individuals who are showing up for our live events, for our virtual events, who are really educating themselves on what drives real estate, what is the economic fundamentals that lead real estate so that we can make great decisions. That is like when we talk about good to great, the difference between good or average and great is literally less than 10% of paying attention a little bit more. And so for investors who are watching the economic fundamentals, why we do these shows, is to provide some real substance of why real estate is doing what it's doing and why we think it's going where it's going, because it's based on data, not on emotional headlines. And we're not buying into there's going to be a bubble, because it makes absolutely no sense. Now, having said that, maybe that's just a term. Is it going to be softening in some regions? Yes. Is it a bubble? I just can't make it make sense.
Now, let's talk this bond yield, Patrick, for a second, because this is one of the reasons we believe that we're not going to see a bubble burst, is because bond yields are finally going in the right direction from our perspective, which is they're coming down. And just so everybody knows, bond yields is how fixed rate mortgages are priced. So when the Bank of Canada raises interest rates, that doesn't impact fixed rate mortgages. That impacts variable rate mortgages, but not fixed rate mortgages. But the 5-year government bond, that's how we price fixed rate mortgages. And that, Patrick, went up to almost 4.5% in the last month or so, and we're already down to 3.87%, which is and by the way, we went to a low of 3.77%. So that's fantastic. We're seeing some pretty massive swings in this 5-year government bond. The point is where is it going to settle and where is it going to level it out? But this is how fixed rate mortgages are priced. And when this is going down, you could expect fixed rate mortgages to be going down into the future.
Yeah, they will eventually follow. But I think when you look at this is just a 6-month chart. But if you look at it over the course of a year, these yields have been the most erratic in history, which speaks to the uncertainty of the market. So when we do future thinking, we start to see these bond yields come down a little bit. It's actually the market saying where they think things are going to go. So that may mean a softening economy. It could mean a lot of different things. But the point is that they are coming down. I think you might spike up and then it'll come back down again. That just speaks to the uncertainty of the market. But this, for us as investors, is good news on the fixed rate side.
I called this real estate market, Patrick, a couple months ago. I think it was in August. I called it a slingshot market that was kind of starting to really, people were going to sit on their hands and this was going to build up momentum. And eventually we're going to let go of this slingshot. And I think one of the things that's going to help is the interest rates. When the interest rates come down enough, both, by the way, the Bank of Canada rate will help because that impacts things like credit cards. It impacts things like lines of credit. It impacts things like car loans. It really impacts the day-to-day living as well as variable rate mortgages, which a lot of people are on. But if they both start coming down, the 5-year government bond yield and the Bank of Canada rate, whether it just stays fixed for a while, which it now has, and it starts to come down, I think you're going to see a lot of pent-up energy in the real estate market start to get unleashed. And then I'll be able to say I was right on the slingshot, Patrick. We'll see.
We'll see. I want to share a quick story here is that a friend of mine, I kind of he reached out to me yesterday. And we talk about the pressure of interest rates and the variable rate versus fixed rates and some of the investors that are getting in trouble. In the past 90 days in Alberta, I won't say where, but in Alberta, he's done almost 15 agreements for sale with people who are in trouble. Now he's got, fairly deep pockets, so he's taking it on and he's readjusting because he sees where they're not maximizing rents, for example. So he sees opportunity to, in fact, bring those properties back to cash flow. That's part one. Part two is he's got a lot of doors and he feels like a little bit of a genius because he locked in really low rates in 2020. But guess what? That means in 2025, those 1.5 rates that he locked in are now going to go and be renewed. So I was giving him a hard time going, okay, well, I hope you're planning for that increase, because otherwise there's going to be AFS coming your direction. You're going to be hoping that you can get out on an AFS. So anyways, a little bit of a funny story, but these are things that are happening in the market.
Here's another great chart, folks. You got to remember this. This is so important. We say it every episode, but you got to remember, people love to talk about a Canadian real estate market. There's no such thing as a Canadian real estate market. So right now we're talking about a balanced market across the country. Meanwhile, there's many parts of Ontario that are in a serious buyer's market, and there's many parts of Alberta that are in a strong seller's market. So, don't buy into the headlines of a balanced market or anything regarding a Canadian market. Really do your research on your particular region. And that goes beyond, Patrick. Often we break down provinces. We talk about Alberta, we talk about Ontario, we talk about BC, and that's great because it's better than the Canadian market, but it's not good enough. The sophisticated investors have got to go right down to their actual region, meaning the municipality you're investing in.
Well, it's interesting. We just, let's shine a light on it for a quick minute. We did a live meeting here in British Columbia last night in Langley. And what was interesting about that is one of our trusted partners, who is Fraser Valley, Lower Mainland, Vancouver, BC, actually, he went through a bunch of stats. I think he probably had at least a dozen regions, Chilliwack and Mission and, Abbotsford, and of course into the Lower Mainland and Surrey. And he looked at all those regions, and guess what? Those are all within an hour and a half drive of each other. And the markets, buyer's market, seller's market, buyers, neutral, that's how regional it is. And it also speaks to why we need to pay attention to those specific regions when we look at what's happening economically.
Here's another great chart on house price expectations, which is the Bank of Canada did this. I shouldn't have said that because Patrick's going to discount it immediately. If it says the words Bank of Canada on it, it's out of Patrick's mind. But anyways, let me continue, which is this survey shows at the beginning of the year, the average person from this survey was expecting their house to appreciate about 2% at the beginning of the year. So pessimism was at its highest. People were only expecting real estate to go up 2%. Now the expectation is that prices will rise 5%. So the expectation from house prices are starting to reverse again. And Patrick, it's funny because I will continue to say this for several months. So hopefully you guys hear me, folks. It was exactly 2 years ago we stood on this on this very channel, doing YouTube, doing live streams, and Patrick, you and I were saying, folks, you've got to be careful. We're at the height of the market, and those who listened and who backed off were very, very happy. And I've been saying for some time, folks, there's still some pain ahead, yes, but we're definitely on the backside of this slide. You're at the bottom. Are you at the tip top? Or sorry, are you at the really, really bottom of the bottom? I don't know. I'm not a fortune teller. I can't tell that, but I can tell you that we're way closer to being out of this problem than we are to get into this problem from my perspective, Patrick. So, and this is just, you're starting to see things turn from my perspective. Still some pain ahead, but some interesting things coming up as well.
Well, I don't know. When we look at house price expectations, again, the Bank of Canada did the survey. We don't know who's in that survey. They could have taken a poll with a bunch of realtors, and what are realtors going to say? Things are going up. You should buy now. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, well, they're not wrong. Okay, Patrick, another chart that I wanted to cover. We talked a little bit about this. These are leading indicators, but consumer sentiment still not great. Definitely at lows of lows.
Listen, I'm going to say it again and just keep hitting it, is that we have to understand that as a country, we are debt-driven consumerism, and that includes housing. And so what's happening right now is when consumers lack confidence or lack the cash flow to go out and buy because they're paying ridiculous amounts of tax. I don't even want to, I think there's like 20 or 15 new taxes. Don't even get me started on that. The point is this, is that consumers are less confident because they have less disposable income, so they're not spending as much. That, in fact, slows down an economy. And so it is a bit of a leading indicator for sure, and businesses are feeling the same way. They can't afford it because of interest rates, so if they're not feeling confident about business going forward because consumers aren't spending, they're not building up inventory. They're not actually improving on what their productivity might be. They're not investing in equipment to produce more. They're actually tapping on the brake, which slows the economy down. All to say this is consumer confidence is such a big indicator of what we see. Now, does that mean things are going to crash and that we're going into a hard recession? No, none of that. What it means is things are going to slow down and people are going to slow things down, which is what we're seeing. And, because we're not particularly productive as a country, which is a whole different conversation, but manufacturing continues to trend down. We're not producing goods. We're not exporting. I mean, we're bragging about 1 month of a $2 billion more export than import. I mean, who cares? Let's do that on a regular basis, and then we can start to talk. And we're not actually shipping and producing and or selling commodities the way we have the ability to, and the commodities that we have, resources that we have. So it's all to say this, is we have to pay attention to the fact that as housing does slow down, that crash, but slow down, is that affects a lot of jobs. So we're going to start to see more and more people be nervous about their jobs. And in fact, there may be some layoffs that we're starting to see in that construction industry. That'll start to slow things down as well.
Let's get to employment, Patrick. Let's talk about this chart here. Speaking about employment growth.
Well, there you go. So you can start to see, in fact, the slowdown that is happening. It's not to say that it's going to come off the rails. Again, we're going to see different provinces, different cities with different levels of employment and unemployment. But ultimately, we're still in good shape. If you start to listen to some of the news out there, there's lots of talk about the construction industry and the fact that builders have touched the brake. The thing about all of this is businesses do, in fact, slow down, touch the brake. There's some conversation, and I was watching some numbers the other day, which is like business insolvencies are up 42%. But the lack of detail of that statement. Well, okay, so business insolvencies. What business? Are they solopreneurs, entrepreneurs? Like literally, are they one-man shows? Are they three-man shows? Are they 300 employee businesses? No. So these are things that we got to look when we look behind the headlines. The point is this: employment growth, although it's softening, still is pretty strong, as is unemployment. If it comes up a little bit, I've said before, if we get into the 6.5% range, it's still a very healthy number.
And one of the things we got to keep in mind, and don't have enough time for it on this show, but definitely, as you can see, what I like about this chart is it goes all the way back to 2007. So that you actually see the last dip there in 2008, 2009, when we get through the great financial crisis. But as we came out of that great financial crisis, you can see how employment growth really slowed down. What's going to be different this time around, Patrick, is technology is very, very, very different in 2024 than it was in 2010. That's 14 years of technological advancement. I'm very curious to see how employment is going to react as technology rolls out. And we got some pretty huge tech that's hitting the streets right now with artificial intelligence and so on and so forth. So we're definitely going to keep our eye close to this because I think it will be fascinating.
Well, I think there's something to be said here, JG, just as an example. So I'm not an expert in the oil and gas industry, but I do certainly have some background and I do pay attention to what's going on. So when we look at oil and gas, it's always about Alberta and all the rest of it. I get all that. But listen, oil and gas is important to Canada as a country. And what we're starting to see is that the development in the oil and gas industry, the game changed over the past 10 years. You used to have a lot of what was referred to, and still is, roughnecks working the rig. Well, you needed a lot of people to do that. Well, technology has changed the game. You need less people. What's happening in Fort McMurray, for example, in what they do in the oil and gas industry is driven by technology. And so we need less labor, traditional, and everybody could get really freaked out about that, saying, well, we're going to lose jobs for trades, or we're going to lose jobs for that labor force, the actual physical labor force. But what we're picking up on is the need for engineers. And I'm talking about engineers in terms of technology and technology development. So it's just a shift of the jobs that are going to be required. Will it require less people overall? Perhaps that's yet to be seen, because to drive that level of technology, you just need a different workforce, a different education, and a different competency. That's my kind of read on it right now. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I totally agree, Patrick. And this and again, back to real estate, I want to bring it back to being a real estate investor, because I think these are great points you're making, Patrick. And And there's going to be a ton of opinions, by the way, about this, again, to Canada as a country and to different provinces. But as an investor, you're investing in a city, you're actually investing in a neighborhood, and you have to be careful of what happens in those neighborhood profiles. So I'll give you a perfect example, Patrick, of what you're talking about. If you're an investor in Fort McMurray, you've seen this firsthand in the last 10 years, what happened. If you invest in Fort McMurray specifically, it's gone through a massive transition, a huge changeover as technology rolled through that industry. But if you're investing in Ottawa, Ontario, what's happened in the oil fields has had no impact on your investment whatsoever. Zero, nada. That's important, Patrick, because where someone invests is critical. And as these industries start going through these technological rollovers, improvements, enhancements, upgrades, whatever you want to call it, it will impact people differently. And real estate investors have to be really, really well connected to what's going to happen in their neighborhood.
I got a comment.
You're just speechless. That was so deep and profound. You're speechless.
Well, I don't know. You know, JG, you've made some really great points there. I don't really have anything to add to that. I think you're pretty thorough.
Awesome. Anyways, that's enough. And that covers us as to why we don't expect the real estate bubble to burst. Let's move on. All right, Patrick, let's talk about the real impact of rising interest rates. We got a great chart here that shows how the impact's been to real gross domestic product based on the Bank of Canada and what they've done to the overnight policy rate. So let's touch on that. We got a couple other really, really cool charts. We're going to show some recent statistics on mortgage default rates, which are finally starting to get published. So let's get into this, Patrick, on the real impact of rising interest rates.
Yeah, you know, I think this chart is one that says a lot. You know, we presented this a couple of times at live meetings, and I think that there's a kind of a fundamental disconnect about the reality of why interest rates have increased in the Bank of Canada message and Chrystia Freeland or Trudeau or whoever about why we're increasing rates. We have to get inflation under control. CPI needs to come down. The only way we can do that is by raising rates. And, you know, when we look at the actual reality of it, this chart really says it all. So we have to consider this, is that when we look at this particular chart, you start to see that where GDP was, okay, which is not CPI, this is gross domestic product, where it was when the rates were lower, and then what happened to that GDP, which is a snapshot of the productivity. It is a economic health of a country, of a province, of a city. And we start to see what happens when rates went up. Well, what happened? We slowed the economy down. Here's the question, JG. Did CPI come down? Oh, they're bragging about it. They're going, look at us go. We brought it down to 3.2%. Okay, 3.2% on top of a whole, it's layered. So is inflation come down? Are prices coming down? No, they're not. You're layering it on top of the other. And this is what drives me freaking crazy, because at the end of the day, what we know is this. Inflation is still rampant in food, still shelter costs going up. And to add to add salt to the wound, if you will, is CPI 30%. Over 30% of CPI is made up of the interest portion of a mortgage payment. And they keep raising rates. So are they bringing CPI down? Absolutely not. It adds to the increase in it. The point is this, what they're doing is slowing the economy down. Is that going to have any effect on inflation or in food prices? No. Is it going to have any effect on fuel prices? Absolutely not. Is it going to have any effect on shelter costs? No. Oh, those just happen to be three things that are really important to us. We got to eat, we got to put fuel in our vehicles, and we need a place to live. So here's a great chart. I think it's a great indication of exactly what is happening in terms of the impact of rising interest rates. So did they need to do it? Yeah, arguably slow the housing market down. Has it slowed it down? Has it brought prices down? Arguably not. I mean, they're coming down from the highs of 21, 22. We'll see.
Patrick, I'd love to jump in, but I was gonna jump in, but I just love when you get all fired up like that. So I thought I would let that go. But let me show you. I got another great chart that I want to actually show people because this one's really important. And these are the mortgage default rates. And we got some current. They're not super current, but we're getting there in terms of current statistics in terms of mortgage default rates. Now we've said this on previous episodes, worth repeating though, is the reason the default rates are not going up. In fact, you can see here they are in many perspectives, Patrick. Mortgage default rates mortgages in arrears are going down, not up. And that's because the banks and all of the institutions in most cases are pushing out amortization. So someone had an amortization of 23 years left on their mortgage. If they look at their paperwork, and some people don't do this, but if you look at your paperwork, that amortization now might be 26, 28. In one case, I have one of my it went over 30 years now, and they just keep pushing it out, but my payments haven't changed, so I'm okay with that.
Well, listen, when you listen to a lot of the experts, they talk about, well, this is eventually going to come back to haunt the banks. They're going to go broke. They're at risk. There's a lot of naysayers out there. And I don't disagree, by the way. Like, none of this makes sense. It's kind of nonsensical in a lot of ways about how they're pulling this off, the risks that they're putting people at, but also in terms of what OSFI says is happening. That's why they said to the banks, you guys got to up your reserve funds. Okay, so they see the risk, but never negate the ability of any central bank, any government to kick the frickin' can down the road. We don't know how they're going to do it, but I think that we can count on they're going to do it. Somehow, some way, there'll be some catastrophe, there'll be some reason to print more money. Something will happen. They're not going to be losing banks over this yet. That is the naysayers that are talking about this. Is there a chance that eventually you're going to start to see foreclosures and or I guess people, renege on deals and mortgages? Yeah, we're already starting to see it in some circumstances. Anyways, I don't know where to go with that other than to say it is interesting to see what's happening in terms of what the banks are doing with the negative amortization moves they're making.
I know exactly where to go with it, Patrick, which is these naysayers you're talking about. And I know they drive you crazy because I hear about it off camera all the time, but I think you should invite them to this show and I will I'll narrate a boxing match between the two of you. That would be so cool. Let's invite it. Folks, if you guys like that idea, by the way, make sure you put it in the comments below. And you should suggest some people that we should invite on this show so we can have a little duke out match between Patrick and whoever else you guys think we should invite. I'll be the narrator. I
love that idea. As a matter of fact, folks, if you know somebody, do an introduction. Do an introduction to CEO at REINCanada.com. Say, you got to get this guy on the show. And if you know them, make sure that you do the introduction so that we can reach out. Let's do it. I love it.
Love the idea. All right, last topic of the day for today is the condo market, especially in Toronto and the GTA, is really taking a tumble, Patrick. And I know you have opinions on the condo market in Alberta. That's very interesting, by the way. But here's an interesting chart about cash flow, what they call the monthly condo cash flow index, which is how much cash flow these condos should generate. We can see here that by the middle, even early 2020, Patrick, these condos essentially have gone underwater and will not cash flow at all, which I got to say, in 2021, 2022, the number of phone calls and coaching calls and events I did where people came to us, Patrick, and said, hey, I just can't seem to find cash flow in condos. And we said, you can forget about it. It's over. You're not going to find cash flow in the condo market. And in case people didn't believe us, here's the chart.
Well, no, I think you make a really great point. Is that here's the chart. And as you can see, when things started to come off the rails, it was easy to see what was happening in that marketplace. And, the trend isn't shifting around. It's not changing. And it's why the condo market, particularly in Toronto GTA region, is really in tough shape right now. A lot of people in trouble, a lot of speculators and gamblers in that market are getting caught. We've said it many times, is there's very few brokerages in terms of realtors that really understand this market. We have a trusted partner who does a brilliant job at this, but at the end of the day, these are challenges in that market, and we have to face those challenges and realize that it was a bit of a gamble if you got into that market speculating on everything and prices only go up and that you're going to be able to pull it off. This is a perfect example of why and how that isn't working.
All right, folks, we're doing a new segment here today called Predictions. I was going to call it Patrick's Predictions, but what the hell? I'll throw my hat in the ring and give you my predictions while I'm at it. They're just guesses from my perspective anyways, but Patrick's got some real science behind his predictions. So just listen to those. And but Patrick, the first prediction is the next rate announcement is on December 6th, right before Christmas. What are your thoughts? What's going to happen here? Are we pausing? Are we going to pause? Are we going to raise? Are we going to decrease interest rates from the Bank of Canada's perspective? What's your prediction?
Well, I think based on where things are heading, it's going to be a pause. There's a very small chance that they would decrease, but I don't see an increase, for sure not. I'd be shocked if they do that. But again, at the end of the day, we use common sense, and I don't know that the Bank of Canada or their good friend Christia uses common sense. So I'm going to just say I'll take the safe bet. I think it's a safe bet, which is they're going to pause.
I'm gonna predict that they're gonna decrease because I'm gonna implore the wishful thinking approach of decrease. So I'm hoping they're gonna decrease. So I'm gonna go with the decrease, Patrick.
Well, I think it makes some investment decisions based on hope. That's a great strategy.
I'm much more pragmatic when it comes to my investing decisions. But next and final prediction right now, Patrick, I gotta say, you've been harping about oil prices. You've been warning that they're going to go up. You've had all these various pontifications around it, or what I call Patrick pontifications around it. But I got back from your place in BC recently, and man, gas at the pump $1.34. Patrick, I thought, holy crap, are we going back to 2014 here? This is incredible.
No. You got back from Alberta where it was $1.34, and so you're just confusing because you were traveling and you had other focus.
It was $1.34 here in Ontario.
Yeah, in Ontario and Alberta, yes. In Vancouver and as in the Lower Mainland, it dropped to $1.69. So just be clear on what region you're talking about.
Well, listen,
that's got nothing to do with oil prices, by the way. So, it has everything to do, but regionality is just about the taxes in British Columbia versus Alberta versus Ontario. So it's all to say this: oil prices are actually down a little bit. I guess I still have got a forecast for oil prices going up. I don't care what's going on, given the wars and stuff, they're only going to go up. That's my belief system. That's really what I'm seeing. And is it always a straight line up? No. If they happen to be down, fill your tank. Good job. But they're still going up.
And when are we can we get an updated forecast here?
Well, listen, I haven't talked to the sheikhs of the Middle East, and Joe hasn't returned my call. Sleepy Joe is probably sleeping. But the point is that when we look at what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, the wars that are happening, as much as we think China's economy is slowing down, so they're going to need less oil, that's not the truth. They're building reserves. So when you start to look at the countries that are actually building oil reserves, it means that they're fearing a shortage. And when you start to kind of do that, where oil prices are going to go. And do I have a prediction? Yeah. I thought they'd be a little bit higher coming up back end of 2023. We'll see what happens. They're kind of like bond yields. Oil prices are like bond yields. They've been very kind of up and down. So 2024, I don't know. First 6 months, I think we'll get close to $100.
Close to $100. Well, I'll tell you what, I got one of my project managers off to Alberta here shortly. So I'm going to be giving him some of my jerry cans so he can fill them up for me, bring them back full, save a few bucks on gas. And then we'll see where we go from here. But I do think
he can sneak those on the plane, a bunch of fuel cans, no problem. Carry on.
No big deal. But I will say this, Patrick, and we should actually touch on this a lot deeper in a future episode. If this is of interest, folks, please put it in the comments. Love to hear from you. But I think there's going to be, a lot more tumultuousness in the market. Because don't forget, as we head into an election cycle in the U.S., in 1 year from now, I think it's early November next year, the election in the U.S. I think between now and then, until they know who's going to be the next president, which way that president's going to swing, is we swinging left, we swinging right, which way are we swinging? I think there's going to be quite a bit of ups and downs and tumultuousness in the market. That's going to be interest rates. That's going to be fuel. Although, we'll see. We'll see how right the Patrick predictions are. We got it on record, and we're keeping a ticker score of Patrick's predictions. So don't worry, folks. I'll keep you in the loop on how right this prediction was.
I've got no comment.
All right, folks, hopefully you've enjoyed episode 27 of Rein It In. If you have any ideas or thoughts or comments you want to leave, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode. We'll see you soon on Rein It In.
Thanks, JG.
If you like what you learned here,
go to the description below and subscribe for our free Insiders newsletter, where you can also stay up to date for our upcoming events and our courses.
If you want to see more stuff like this, click there.